Have you ever stumbled upon something so ordinary that it hides a terrifying secret? Jake had. It started with a VHS tape he found in the back of a thrift store on a rainy Thursday. He did not expect it to change everything. He did not expect his life to unravel before he could understand why. Jake was 28. He collected old electronics the way some people collected stamps. Old radios, film cameras with cracked lenses, and VCRs that still clicked and hummed when plugged in. He loved the way the past sounded through those machines, the faint static, the dead air between channels, the promise of a story trapped in magnetic tape. On that particular afternoon, the air smelled like mildew and oil. The store was dim, rows of shelves like low tombstones of technology. A clerk moved between aisles, indifferent to the world. In the far corner, half hidden behind a stack of yellowed magazines, Jake noticed a VCR with its plastic case scarred and sticky. Beside it lay a single, unlabeled black cassette. He picked it up. There was only a tiny handwritten number on the side, 001. It had a weight to it, not heavy so much as insistently present, as if it had been waiting for someone with hands like his. He bought it without thinking, paid cash, and walked into the rain. That night, the house felt louder than usual. The pipes, the distant road, the small moans of settling wood. Jake cleared the living room table and set the VCR before the old television like an offering. He did the old ritual, dust the slot, slide the cassette in, press play. For a moment, there was only white noise and soft electric breathing. Then, an image surfaced from static like a thing being pulled out of sleep. A family in a living room appeared on the screen. A man stood by a doorway. A woman arranged a blanket on a sofa. A child sat on the floor, knees to chest, eyes forward. Jake's stomach dropped the instant his brain told him what his eyes already knew. The wallpaper was the same faded pattern as his living room. The lampshade was the same dented beige. The crooked picture frame on the wall matched the one above his couch, down to the tiny chip at the bottom left corner. He reached out and rubbed it on his pant leg, as if to prove the world was not an image. He laughed once, a short, uncertain sound. Coincidence, he told himself. People had similar things. Patterns repeated in houses built during the same era. But the longer he watched, the harder it became to believe that explanation. The father in the tape moved deliberately. Every step seemed measured, as if choreographed for someone looking on. When the man glanced toward the camera, Jake felt the lens find his face in the dark living room. For a breathless second, the man's eyes seemed to look through the glass and find Jake's eyes. The man did not blink. The woman hummed as she folded the blanket, an odd, off-keyed tune that sounded like it had been recorded through cotton. The child did not smile. The child simply looked at the camera with an intensity that felt like accusation. Jake rewound. He ran the frames in slow motion, watching micro moments, the ripple of a curtain, the exact tilt of a lampshade, a smudge on the kitchen counter that matched the shape of a mug he owned. A book that sat in his living room was on the shelf in the footage. A chair he'd left broken in the hall sat pristine and whole. Things that were not as they'd been now appeared to have been arranged in the tape's world. He pressed pause, and the room held its breath with him. Even the air in his house seemed to compress. He tried to rationalize. Perhaps the tape had been filmed in his house years before he lived here. Perhaps someone had used his decor as a reference. Perhaps his mind was playing tricks. But the longer he circled reasons in his head, the less they fit. There was a kind of intention in the way the frames were captured, as if the camera and tape knew more than it should. When he left the room to get coffee, he looked back at the television, expecting the image to be ordinary when he returned. It was still running. The family continued their day as if they did this every afternoon. Once or twice, the camera lingered over the child's face for a beat too long. The boy's mouth moved in a way that suggested whispered words, but the audio was thin. Static bled into syllables. That night, Jake lay awake and listened to the house as if it might speak back. Every creak and sigh read like punctuation. At 3 a.m, his dog Luther started barking at a corner of the living room where there was nothing but the shadow of the armchair. Jake walked to the window and watched rain etch the streetlights while his heart hammered a rhythm he could not stop. He told himself to forget it in the morning. Sleep did not come easily. The next night, he played the tape again. He told himself he would be scientific, document everything, record what changed. The tape flickered on. It started at a frame he did not remember seeing the night before. The family's routine continued, but small details were wrong in a way that felt deliberate. The father's wardrobe missing at home was visible in the tape. A mug that had been shattered by accident in Jake's kitchen was whole there, placed upside down on the counter. He pressed pause and then rewound frame by frame until the images blurred. He wrote notes on the pad beside him, letters scrawled in shaking script. Chair, hole, book, on shelf, watch, on man. The tape, if it was a record, had recorded things that were not yet true in his life. The tape did not show the past. It revealed a version of the present that was close enough to be real, yet altered. At some point, he realized the child had been staring not just at the camera, but through it. The boy's thin mouth parted and formed words, silent because the static drowned them, but Jake could guess the cadence as if learning a speech by watching lips. He sat immobile and leaned close to the screen, straining to hear. For a sliver of a second, the sound cohered, an almost voice that braided with the static and seemed to say his name. Jake slammed off the television out of reflex, hands clapping over his ears as if sound itself could be shut out. Silence descended like a blanket. He sat in that muffled room feeling the pulse of his own blood. A ridiculous thought surfaced. What if the tape had chosen him? What if whatever was on the tape preferred him, the way a predator learns a path? He pushed the thought away, but it nested in the places where paranoia grows. The morning came gray and heavy. Jake brewed coffee, but it tasted bitter, metallic, as if the water had carried something it should not. He told himself he would not play the tape today. But the VCR sat on the table like a mouth waiting to be fed. Its red light blinked, a tiny heartbeat in the shadows. He tried to distract himself. He cleaned the kitchen, scrubbed dishes, rearranged shelves, but every object he touched reminded him of the tape. The book he moved onto the counter had already been there, in the footage. The cracked mug he threw in the trash appeared whole, upside down, in the tape's kitchen. The air carried the weight of inevitability. By noon, he gave in. He sat, remote in hand, thumb hovering. The VCR whirred. Static crawled, then shapes surfaced. This time, the family wasn't just living their quiet routine. The father stood by the window, unmoving. The mother sat on the couch, her hands folded in her lap, humming the same distorted tune, but slower, like a record dying. The child was still on the floor, only now his lips moved clearly. Jake leaned forward, heart clawing at his ribs. The words formed with deliberate care. Your turn. 2 syllables, spoken not in sound, but in intent, carved into Jake's skull. He froze. The television buzzed as if pleased. Suddenly, the perspective in the tape shifted. The camera, whatever it was, moved backward, away from the family, toward a doorway at the far end of the room. The lens glided forward, through the hall, into a kitchen almost identical to Jake's. Every detail was sharper now. The tile pattern, the scratches on the counter, even a faint stain by the sink that Jake knew by heart. The camera stopped at the window. Beyond it, rain lashed against glass. Lightning cracked. For half a second, the reflection in the window was not the family. It was Jake. He lunged forward and hit stop. The VCR clicked, but the image stayed frozen, his own face staring back at him from inside the frame. He yanked the tape out and threw it across the room. The television snapped into static. Jake stood panting, sweating, certain that he had broken something. Maybe not the tape, but a boundary. That night, sleep did not come. Every shadow in the house bent wrong, stretched too far. His dog refused to enter the living room. Luther sat at the edge of the hall, ears flat, teeth bared at nothing. Jake locked the tape in a drawer. But drawers did not stop thoughts. At 2 a.m., the television flicked on by itself. The VCR's slot opened with a mechanical whine. Jake stumbled into the room, adrenaline burning his chest. The drawer was open. The tape was gone. It sat in the machine, halfway inside, as if pushed there by invisible fingers. Jake shouted. The sound cracked in the air, fragile. The screen bloomed with static, then bled into an image. Different this time. Not the family, not the boy. The camera looked at his house from the outside. Rain poured. The porch light swung in the storm. The image pulsed, stuttered, then zoomed slowly toward the front door. Jake's stomach turned to ice. He bolted to the window, ripped the curtain aside. His porch was empty. Only rain, endless rain. But when he looked back at the television, the tape showed a shadow moving closer to the door. Closer, closer, until the frame filled with black. Then came a knock. 3 slow, deliberate knocks that shook the wood of his door. Jake's breath hitched. He turned the volume down on the TV. The knocking did not stop. It grew louder, each strike like a hammer blow. Luther barked frantically, then whimpered, backing away. Jake grabbed a baseball bat and edged toward the door. He pressed his eye to the peer hole. Nothing, only rain. But the knocking persisted, rhythmic, patient. He whispered to himself, "Don't open it." He stepped back. On the television, the door in the tape opened by itself. Darkness swallowed the frame. Then, in the silence, the boy's voice, "Your turn." The screen went black. The VCR powered down. Jake collapsed into the chair, trembling, the bat clattering to the floor. Hours passed in silence, broken only by the storm. When the sun rose, his door was locked, untouched. But deep inside, Jake knew something had entered, not through the door, through the tape. And now it lived here, with him. By daylight, the house felt hollow. Shadows lingered in corners longer than they should. The clock ticked, but the second hand faltered, hesitated, as if unsure whether to continue. Jake walked room to room, checking windows, drawers, mirrors. Each time he caught himself looking for the boy. But the boy wasn't there. Not yet. He thought of burning the tape. He thought of smashing the VCR. But some part of him whispered that it would not matter. Once you watched, you were part of it. It was watching you back. And when Jake returned to the living room, the tape was waiting on the table. He had not put it there. The black plastic case gleamed faintly in the morning light. like an invitation, like a trap.
The third night came heavy and suffocating. Jake hadn't slept. His eyes were bloodshot. His hands trembled from too much coffee and too little rest. But it wasn't exhaustion that ate at him. It was dread. The house seemed alive. The tape still sat on the table, waiting. He told himself he wouldn't touch it, but by midnight, the house grew too still. The silence pressed against his ears. And then, the static started. The air thickened around him. The television powered on by itself, glowing in the dark like an open wound. The tape slid into the VCR without his hand touching it. Jake backed away, bat in hand. His heart pounded faster. The screen flickered, and there he was again. The boy, this time closer than ever, closer than Jake wanted. His face filled the screen. His smile was sharp, unnatural, a grimace stretched too wide. His eyes locked onto Jake's. The room seemed to shrink, and for the first time, Jake heard the words not just in his head, but aloud. A voice, thin and echoing, crawling from the speakers. "It's your turn." The words chilled his blood. Jake shouted. He smashed the power button. He yanked the plug, but the television stayed on. The tape rolled forward. His breath caught in his throat. The camera's view shifted. Not the family's house, not the street. It was Jake's bedroom. He felt a cold sweat. The lens showed his bed, his sheets, his nightstand. The angle came from the ceiling corner, where no camera existed. Fear rooted him to the floor. And there, lying in the bed, was Jake himself, sleeping, breathing slowly. His heart raced. Jake's breath faltered. He was awake, watching himself sleep. The screen pulsed. Every pulse was a warning. The boy's face appeared in the corner of the frame, watching the sleeping Jake. Then the boy turned, slowly. He looked through the lens. He looked straight at the real Jake. Jake shivered uncontrollably. Something moved behind him, a reflection in the dark glass of the window, a shadow. He spun around. Nothing, only the dog, whimpering in the hall, tail between its legs. The tension was unbearable. The television's hum grew deeper, shaking the floorboards. The image glitched. Frames tore like ripped paper. The room felt like it was closing in. Now it showed Jake walking through the hallway, turning doorknobs, pacing. But he hadn't done that yet. It was showing what he was about to do. He screamed at the screen, "Stop!" But the tape didn't stop. The future unspooled frame by frame, until finally it showed him standing in the living room, exactly where he was. Only this version of him wasn't holding a bat. It was smiling, a horrible, knowing smile. Jake stumbled back. The smiling version of him on the tape raised a hand. It pointed at something behind Jake. Jake froze. He turned his head slowly. Every muscle screamed at him to run. The boy stood in the corner of the room, small, silent, grinning. His eyes glowed faint in the dark like dying embers. The shadow seemed to lean toward him. Jake dropped the bat. The lights flickered. The boy whispered again. "It's your turn." The words echoed endlessly, and the television cut to black. Jake blacked out. The room was silent. The storm outside continued. When he woke, the morning light cut through the blinds. The VCR was empty. The tape was gone. The dog was gone. Silence filled the house. Something lingered in the corners. For days after, Jake tried to move on, but shadows didn't leave him. Mirrors caught glimpses of movement that wasn't his. The hum of static followed him from room to room. He could never be alone again. Sometimes at night, his television flickered on. No tape inside, just static. And within that static, shapes. A boy, a smile, and a whisper. It's your turn.